So here we are at Brooklands Museum in the wonderful Loch King room today, and we're doing the first of our Meet the Volunteer episodes, and hopefully we'll do many more of these. There were over 700 volunteers last time I looked registered to help out here at Brooklands Museum in Weybridge in Surrey, and I describe them as the beating heart of the museum. They come from all backgrounds, all ages. Some come several days a week, some come very occasionally. But without them, Brooklands wouldn't be the place that it is. We wouldn't have the spirit of Brooklands without our volunteers. And if you look on any feedback on social media or elsewhere, you'll find that comments run through and through about how valuable the volunteers are, how visitors to Brooklands have enjoyed talking to and listening to the stories and the experiences of the volunteers here at Brooklands. So, in our first episode, I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be here with David Reynolds. David is one of our long-standing volunteers. I think we've been here about 12 years, and we'll come on to that. And the reason we're chatting today is because you and I both have a common interest. Probably the greatest icon of the 20th century, Concorde. But your life goes a long way back before your involvement in Concorde, and we'll come on to that a bit later on. I hope you don't mind me saying, but by the time Mark's edited this and put it out there, it'll probably coincide pretty much with your 94th birthday, if I've got that right, which is quite incredible. So, in those days, when you were born, back in 1930, Brooklands was still a race circuit, it was still an aerotrack. I definitely remember it as a young child. It was much later on before it came into your life. But tell me a little bit about your early days in London.
I didn't know of Brooklands, but I did know of Croydon, because in 1937 my father took me to Croydon, and we stood on the top of the Aerodrome Hotel and watched the aeroplanes coming and going. And I guess that probably sowed the seed of aviation that later developed into my career. But one of the things I remember before the war, basically, was being fitted out with a gas mask at the local school, the Crystal Palace fire, which I was taken up to the Whitestone Pond in Hampstead, and we looked across London and you could see the blaze. And putting my finger into I had my bicycle upside down, turning the wheels round, and put my finger stupidly into the sprocket, and it nearly took the finger off, and that's what I've got to now.
I read about the double fingernail, yes. And you then, you had to go to school wearing a gas mask.
We took gas masks to school. At school, whenever the air raid sirens went, you took your gas mask with you to the air raid shelter. And in 1940, I was at school outside Winchester, and one night the gas rattles went, and we all had to put on our gas masks and went down to the air raid shelter. And after the all clear went, several hours later, we went back into the school building and were ushered into the big hall, and the headmaster said it wasn't a gas attack, an incendiary bomb had hit the Eastleigh pickle factory. So that was our first experience of a gas raid.
Goodness me. So you were a youngster as war was raging.
And we watched the Battle of Britain, and used to clap when Jerry's were shot down.
Did you really?
Yeah, oh yeah. And we would go later to any aircraft wrecks, and my brother picked up what was a gyroscope out of a German aircraft and took it home. But a day later, the local bobby was knocking on the door. The government wanted this gyroscope.
Really?
Yes. How they found out we'd got it, we don't know.
Goodness me.
But there were other people looking at the site at the same time.
Yeah. And so, some other memories of that Battle of Britain. You saw the Spitfires and the Hurricanes that were built here at Brooklands.
Yes. A lot of people don't know, and I tell that to people on the Concorde tour, on the history, that in 1936 the Board of Hawker made a decision to assemble 600 Hurricanes here. Now, if they hadn't done that, the outcome of the Battle of Britain would have been very different, because it was the Hurricanes that did the heavy lifting in the Battle of Britain. The Spitfire got the kudos.
Absolutely, yeah.
But it all happened here.
It happened right here. There were thousands of...
altogether, yes. But the first 600, they didn't have a government order.
Your first flight, which I recall, was in a Tiger Moth.
Yes. Well, I was in the ATC at Highgate. You either had to be in the ATC or the Army cadets. And once a term, we had Nelson to an RAF station. And we went to RAF Pansanger, I don't think it exists now, and had my first flight in the Tiger Moth. And also they happened to have there a Sikorsky helicopter. There were very few helicopters around in those days. It was flown by a naval pilot, and I had probably a half-hour flight in this thing. It was lovely.
Goodness me, that sounds dangerous. The helicopter Tiger Moth, of course, there were lots of those flying.
Yeah, exactly. So are.
Yeah. We've had Tiger Moths.
Yes, indeed. And one of our Concorde pilots has one, doesn't he?
Steve, yeah, Steve Bovis.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you remember, how old were you when you were taking that Tiger Moth?
Well, I was 17, I guess, 16, 17.
Yeah. And back to cars, so a little after the war, so 1950, you got an MGTA.
Yes, yes, indeed. I bought an MG, very nice, cream coloured, and had brown cycle-type mudguards. And I found out that it was a Works cream cracker team car before the war. There were 3 of them. And frankly, I couldn't really afford to run it. I only kept it probably for a year and sold it for roughly what I paid for it, in round figures, £250. Yeah. But later, when I was at Brooklands, I saw an auctioneer's catalogue, and there was this car, my car, valued at £90,000.
Goodness me.
Which I'd kept it.
Yes, you are. Have you got a picture of that then?
Yes, I've got a picture of it here. That's...
Wow. Is that you driving it?
Yes.
That's fantastic. Yeah. So £250 becomes £90,000. Yeah. Did you have to do much to it?
No, not really. It was in pretty good shape.
Yeah. Wow, it's been well looked after. Restored.
Yes, it obviously had a lot of money spent on it between my time and the 90,000.
Been up in an auction.
Yes.
Goodness me, that's amazing. I bet you wish you'd have more.
Exactly.
But we also that.
Yes.
Classic cars of various sorts along the way. And goodness me. So that's the
Austin 7. And then I moved into Morris Minor.
Oh yeah,
the old side valve.
Side valve.
The low headlamp side valve one. Yeah. And that I actually took on my honeymoon, drove down to Cannes.
To the south of France, yes.
At a maximum speed of 55 miles an hour, with your foot flat on board. Of course, there were no motorways, it was on the Route Nationale.
Yes, so that took a while.
Yes, it did.
But your first jet flight was on a Caravel.
Yes,
Tell
yes.
me about that.
Well, SAS was a leading airline in the 50s. They were pioneering the polar flights from Europe to the US West Coast, and they were one of the early orders of the Caravel. And I was lucky enough to get on the delivery flight of one from Toulouse to Copenhagen. And it was a great step forward, like the Viscount that was built here. Yes. That was a tremendous step forward for the propeller turbine.
It was. So you were working, I've jumped ahead a little bit, so you were working for SAS by now, weren't you?
Yes,
you
yes. As a sales rep.
Sales rep.
Yes.
And was that your first big job into sales?
Yes. Because
that?
the other jobs were basically clerical jobs before that. And so I found my feet in that and tried to get into BOAC. And BOAC would only take people who'd started in their reservations department.
Yes.
And I'd been through that stage. And one day the BOAC sales manager rang me up and said there'd be an ad in the Telegraph next week, get your application in quick, and I did.
So he was keen to get you into BOAC. But had you been to university?
No.
You didn't?
No. I was going to go to the Havilands as an aircraft apprentice, but they were full, and they would only take me if I got imprinted in physics, and I didn't get it. Physics. Yeah. That's how I ended up in the travel business. In 1965, I was selected to go for interview for training for senior management. And that involved 3 days of interviews at Great Fosters at Egham with wives. And eventually I got through, but they said that I was the only one. There were 20 of us for 5 places. I was the only one who didn't have overseas experience. And they said they'd send me overseas, and provided I didn't make a mess of it, I would go on the management course later. And I was sent to Manchester Business School. But I was sent first of all to Trinidad.
Oh, yes.
And where I was given a very grotty bungalow with a very posh address, 3A Champs-Élysées, Marivaux. No connection with Champs-Élysées in Paris. But it was within walking distance of the BOAC head office.
So you went from Trinidad after we managed to get rid of BOAC into Barbados, and you were setting up the Barbados sales operation.
Yes, and then opened a shop in Antigua, and then a shop in Port of Spain. And I had 2 girls in Grenada that used to go around the hotels and that sort of thing. But I covered originally an area from the Cayenne and French Guiana to the Cayman Islands. But as the business grew, we divided the Caribbean in 2 on the British Virgin Islands. And I was given the option as to whether I wanted to do the east or the west, and I decided to stay in the east.
Right.
I had a very nice house on Sandy Lane.
Oh, did you really?
Yes.
I saw a picture of Sandy Lane.
And had a mirror dinghy tied to a palm tree.
So the fact you were now in BOAC really opened the world up for you, didn't it? So your time in the Caribbean,
and then
started in 1966.
I went out there in roughly July for a month for the handover, and I took over from Jim Harris, who became the marketing director of the BA eventually. But he went to Toronto, and I followed him to Toronto, and then he went to New York, and I followed him to New York.
I want to come on to actually your time in New York when Concorde started. We're into the 70s now.
Yes, yeah.
So
into the 70s. Well, I actually left before the flight came. We'd got the approval. I left in August of 77.
Right, but a lot had gone on before that.
Oh, yes.
So Concorde, let's just touch upon that. Concorde first flew on the 2nd of March 1969.
Yes,
9th of April 69 in the UK.
Yes.
And there were 7 years of testing.
That's right, yes.
And the first
5,900 hours of flight.
Is that how much it was?
Yes, 2,160 supersonic.
Goodness me, it's the most tested aeroplane ever.
And the 747 was 1,500 hours, just for comparison.
That is incredible. I can tell you a Concorde tour guide. These facts just roll off your tongue, it's marvellous. And then we started commercial service on the 21st January 76 to Bahrain.
Yes.
We couldn't operate Concorde to the United States.
No.
Why was that, and how did we solve that problem?
Well, I mean, the real reason is that Kennedy wanted to be first into space and the Russians beat him.
Right.
Then he wanted to be first in the supersonics, but he didn't start till 2 years too late.
Mm.
And so he wanted something bigger and better than the Brits and the Russians were doing, and the French were doing. And so he wanted a Mach 3 aeroplane that had a lot longer range as well, and carried, I think, 250 people. I did actually go to the wooden mock-up in Seattle, but I don't really remember that much about it. And Kennedy appointed McNamara, who was, he had a ministerial job, but prior to that he was president of Ford. Okay. But he gave him the job at the Supersonic Committee, if you like. He was a great environmentalist, and basically he was dead against any supersonic aeroplane, environmental reasons mainly. And that basically got the environmental thing going in the States in a big way.
Particularly in New York.
Yeah, and particularly in New York. I mean, all sorts of rumours were put out to run the Concorde down. And they used to say, because it came into land like this, the pilot couldn't see the runway. They completely forgot that Concorde has a droop nose. So we arranged for Chuck Yeager, the first American to fly faster than sound. I think he did it in 1948. Yeah. Chuck Yeager, to have a ride in the cockpit of the Concorde. And he came off the airplane saying he could see just as many approach lights as the 747. So that demolished that.
Yeah.
But there were other things. It's a gas guzzler, and you'd compare it to them driving a V8 350 cubic inches with only one person in it.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of thing.
Yeah. But you were there, right in the heart of all this going on.
And working too with the lawyer who we'd taken on, especially for the New York job, William Plock III.
Okay. So he was pivotal in getting, and you were working with him getting this overturned, this final Concorde overturned, because we went to Washington first, didn't we?
Exactly.
How did that come about?
It came about because Washington was a federal airport, and New York, the airport was owned by the New York Port Authority, which was part of New York State. It's the tricky relationship between the federal and the states.
Yes. So we overcame the ban in Washington.
Because
it was a federal airport.
Yes.
And we started services there in 1977 or something.
Yes. But there was never the demand to Washington. New York was the place.
Yeah.
And I mean, that is borne out if you look on Delta Golf, the table in the rear cabin that shows where all the Concordes are now and the number of hours they all flew. The B-8 ones in round figures are 23,000 hours apiece.
Yeah.
The French ones, 17,000, 18,000, that sort of figure. It just shows the demand is to London, not to Paris.
No, London to New York.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you know that only too well.
I did. I flew London to New York many times.
Yeah, exactly.
Twice the speed of sound. But your first Concorde flight was Scandon.
That was in October of 1974, 50 years ago this year.
Yeah.
50 years ago next month, in fact.
Incredible. Before the aeroplane went into commercial service.
Yes, long before. And this was on the French pre-production aeroplane, Sierra Alpha. And André Turcar, the French chief test pilot, was in command, and Brown Trubshaw was his number 2, the British chief test pilot. And we did London Gander in 2 hours 10. And I think back to Alcock and Brown in 1919, when they did the first non-stop crossing of the Atlantic in 16 hours and 28 minutes.
Wow.
Just so how things change.
Yes.
And then we were flying down. I always say that there was a degree of frisson, if you like, between the Brits and the French throughout the Concorde project. There was a long argument over the E on the end of Concorde, which the Brits gave way to.
Tony Benn.
Yeah, Tony Benn. And there was 2 different languages. The French were working in metric, the Brits were working in imperial. But the frisson was brought home to me on the second leg of this flight, when we were flying down the eastern seaboard outside US airspace, 59,000 feet, Mach 2 on the clock, and lunch came up. And guess what the menu was? Beef Wellington. And the French were insistent that we had Napoleon brandy after us. So when we got to Mexico City, we were feeling no pain at all. But what was interesting was André Turcot had to make the decision as to whether to keep supersonic the whole way from Gander to Mexico City and go south of the Florida Keys, or cross the top of Florida. He decided eventually to cross the top of Florida. He had to come down from 59,000 feet to 39,000 feet. Subsonic, cross the top of Florida. You see the whole panhandle and the islands. And then when you got out into the Gulf, he opened up the taps. And of course, from that height, the acceleration was greater. The rate of climb was greater than any fighter used in World War II.
Goodness me. And went back up. For the rest of the trip.
Yes.
Well, I think I would have just snuck over Florida. It's not that wide, is it? I probably would have gone away with it. But the sonic boom, of course, they're worried about
that's
over land,
yes,
which you mustn't.
Well, and of course, if you travelled on the QE2, you heard the boom.
Yes.
Because it was on the same path.
So who would have guessed that, back in 1974, when you were taking Concorde on the first flight, your first flight to Concorde, that 50 years later you're going to be volunteering here showing people around?
Yes. I would be taking groups of agents on educational trips on the Concorde. And that's how I did a number of...
To New York?
To New York or Washington.
Okay.
And so it's a marvellous opportunity.
So you flew quite a lot.
Yeah, I did 24 flights.
Did you really?
I reckon I've done a couple of hundred Atlantic crossings.
Good. And your time here at Brooklands,
yes,
12 years now.
Yes.
And your regular day is Saturday?
Yes, I'm normally Saturday. I do Saturday mornings. I find morning is long enough at my old age.
Goodness me, I couldn't be half of it.
By far the oldest one.
Yeah. And what is it, when you see guests to here at Brooklands, they come and they buy their extra ticket, Concorde experience. What do you see on their faces? What is it?
Well, I mean, they're intensely interested. And of course, because one's able to speak from experience, one can put over, one obviously puts over, you can put it over one's interest in the aeroplane and things that will interest them in a language they can understand, because I only speak from a commercial point of view, and tell them the odd story, Chuck Yeager story and that sort of thing. I get people are so grateful when they come out, and it's nice talking to them and their connection. They might have flown on, a few have. A lot of them say, they wanted to go on it but couldn't raise the money, and that sort of thing. And I was offered just recently a £5 tip.
Oh, really?
The chap was surprised, but I said to him, I can't take it, I'm sorry. But I should have said to him, give it to me, I'll put it in the poor box. But I didn't.
That's wonderful. But it's fantastic to see the visitors here.
Yes.
See their faces light up.
Yes.
And see young people gaze up at Concorde.
Yes.
Just amazed and enthralled by.
Well, it was so far ahead of its time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I tell them.
And what does it do for you? When you leave here on a Saturday morning, apart from being tired, how do you feel driving home?
Well, I feel it's a morning well spent, basically. You've got to get up early to get out. I mean, the other thing I appreciate is meeting all the other volunteers who are like-minded, all from different backgrounds, different professions, and it's so interesting talking to them, grumbling about the management sort of thing.
We do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But if it's not that, it's the weather.
Yes, yeah. But that's fantastic. What would you say to anybody that's thinking of volunteering at Brooklands and perhaps isn't sure whether it's right for them, young or old? What would you say?
I would say do it. Whatever age you are, as long as you can move around, because it'll give you back so much, the pleasure of doing it, and you'll learn so much. If you don't know about airplanes or cars, you'll learn it from your fellow volunteers.
Yeah, absolutely. So a passion or an interest in cars, airplanes, buses, boats, motorcycles, boats, bicycles. Yes. Bring something to Brooklands.
Exactly.
And as I said earlier on, it really is the volunteers really are the beating heart.
Yes. And in our thing we do for the Concorde signature events, we used to say about the volunteers, how the whole place is dependent on volunteers. Yeah. Without the volunteers, there's no viable museum at all. And all that's gone from the presentation, which I think is a shame.
Yeah. When I'm involved in those signature events, I certainly make sure that message gets across.
Do you? Yeah. Yes. I would like to do one of your big events that you do.
Let's sort that out.
Yes, next year.
Yes, we'll sort
if I'm still here.
Yours going to be still here, so we'll definitely sort that out. But David, this has been, we only intended to chat for half an hour, so it's going to be dark soon. But listen, this has been absolutely fascinating, and I know there's other stories we haven't even touched upon, because I've missed a few on my list apart from Nelson. But this has been absolutely fantastic. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed it. Enjoyed talking to you. I always do.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. And I'd just like to wrap up by saying, really, again, reiterating how important it is to have this team of volunteers here at Brooklands. They really, really are the beating heart of this museum. And every volunteer you see out there, whether it be in the motoring sheds, on any of the aeroplanes or in the bus museum, have got a story to tell. And what we've done today is learn about David and his story, his incredible life story, his incredible background. And as you can see, when you visit Brooklands, there's a lot more to these volunteers than first meets the eye. So this is just the first of our time with meeting the volunteers here at Brooklands. And I'm sure you'll agree with me, it's been a fantastic session with David. So thank you once again, David.
Thank you.